Good morning and welcome to Sales TV, the European Early Edition. It's great to be back after the summer off. I am looking forward to a fun-packed and absolutely wonderful schedule for the rest of the year. Today, we are going to be talking about, are you living your enablement vision? And I am lucky enough to be joined by Arup. So if we can bring Arup in, here he is, looking dashing as ever. Arup, I've known you for 3 years, and it's been a great kind of set of conversations we've had, but no one else out there knows you. So the easy, great opening conversation is, can you tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself?
Of course, thank you, Andy, for having me on SalesTV. I've got to say, one of the best moments in our relationship is when you described me David Ginola of Enablement.
It's because you're worth it.
I take that as a massive compliment, so thank you for that. I'm not sure if you're commenting on my age or perhaps my skill in the midfield area, but thank you. I've been in enablement now, both sales operations and enablement, in a B2B context for the vast majority of my career. I started off in sales operations, which allowed me to kind of understand the mechanics of how to get a B2B sales function more productive from a capability perspective, whether that's process or whether that's metrics or whether that's systems. Actually, over the last 6-7 years, have gravitated towards the enablement side as well, which now looks more at, of course, the obvious pillar there is learning and development, adult education, but also incorporating other kind of drivers of productivity, such as value proposition development too. So I think I've been very lucky in my career, spanning both sales operations, sales enablement, having a branch and time in marketing operations. It's allowed me to complete perspective together. And I believe what I can kind of differentiate myself on a little bit is the ability to bring that more rounded go-to-market experience.
Brilliant. And I know you've had a wide range of experiences. So what we really want to talk about is, how can sales teams align their daily processes with the buyer-centric vision, which is, everyone's talking about being buyer-centric, but how can you help as enablement people get that alignment with their processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the ethos of buyer centricity, and organizations talk a really good name around this, is this whole idea that if you follow the buyer's journey and you follow the buying process, then that gives you the opportunity to be more kind of more finely aligned to your buyer, and actually it's and of course, there's so much content and so much thought leadership on this that ultimately you've got a percentage of your audience or your market that is at a point of making a buying decision, being able to understand what that 3 to 5%, who that 3 to 5% is, and then being able to help them track through that buying journey, more effectively track through that buying journey, is where organizations are theoretically gravitating towards, right? I think organizations are trying to create the processes and the capabilities to move towards an understanding of that, because the stats are all there, and Andy, you know that, right, in terms of the percentage of time that buyers now spend ahead of any engagement with a salesperson, doing research, potential vendors, a company, products, etc. The amount of time that are now prepared to actually spend in engagement activities with salespeople, and how that's decreased over time. So the amount of research that goes in beforehand has increased, and so buyers are arguably near enough making a specific buying decision related to a specific vendor. And of course, the amount of time that they're spending with salespeople has decreased substantially. So I think there's this whole move towards understanding that buyer journey and wanting to have salespeople more closely associated with that. I'd say, I have a question mark as to whether, maybe we can debate this a little bit, as to whether organizations have been genuinely successful at moving towards that position, or moving their process towards a more buyer-centric vision.
Yeah, well, obviously we talked last week about some of the challenges about aligning sales and marketing in the buying's journey, and as you said, key stat: 70% of the customer's buying decision has actually been made before they let a salesperson into the room or a company representative. Yeah, I think it's very, very difficult these days to take yourself out of the internal or the internal external view, at the inside out view, in my opinion. And people get hung up on what the company wants as opposed to actually truly aligning to what the buyer necessarily wants. And that's not an evil thing that they're doing. It's just all the processes they know are to make business go well. So they kind of don't get that opportunity to kind of put themselves in that external view and then kind of okay, how do I map onto that? So I think buyer centricity, customer centricity is really, really important and key. However, part of the challenge is it's not easy to put yourself in that position when everything just says inside out as a view. I mean, is that what you were driving at?
Completely. And I guess the sort of the irony here is that both buyers and sellers are moving broadly in the same set of dynamics. And I've been through about 5 or 6 times. I'm not saying that this is exhaustive in terms of my experience, but I've been through about 5 or 6 different lines of business at different organizations in a B2B context. And what I've seen is that if you're selling into SME, whatever type of product you want, if you're selling into SME, it could take between 30 to 45 days in terms of a sales cycle. If you're selling into mid-market, it could take about 60 to maybe about 90 days. And if you're selling to enterprise, of course, that's 90 days plus. Of course, it could take 1, 2, 3+ years as well, depending on the marquee brand of the client or the prospect that you're after. Now, if that's consistent, what does that tell us? That tells us that buyers are moving in a certain cadence in their organizational structure, and they've got to spend money in the same way that sellers are moving within a cadence within that organizational structure. Whether you're in profit or non-profit, you still have to hit a certain set of objectives and metrics and achievements through the course of a 12-month period. Perhaps in profit-based organizations, that arguably creates a slightly more mid to short-term pressure. But the sellers are moving within that 12-month context, and buyers are moving within that 12-month context. We both are. So I think it's sometimes sellers get so, and I understand this because in profit-based organizations, you've got a board or an independent set of investors that you've got to report back up to. If you're publicly traded, of course, you're reporting back up to the stock exchange. So I get that there is a quarterly pressure, but I think that's where the misalignment comes in. Like, sellers are trying to achieve that quarterly pressure, and we end up saying things like kind of the commercial engine. Personally reference the sales process as the commercial engine many times in the past, almost as if you put a set of inputs, you track everybody in terms of your clients or your prospects through that engine, and they come out the other side. And with that kind of quarterly pressure, it creates that sort of disassociation with how the buyer is moving. Ironically, the buyer is moving within the same almost calendarized context. It's just about getting a level of appropriate fit. Easy for me to say. I know it's challenging.
Yeah, it's interesting that before we go on to the next question, there's been a great comment here from Charles Talbot, where he said, I found the buyer-based exit criteria is a great place to start. If a sales process is a sequence of buyer decisions, which you alluded to there, the processes and the steps that they're going through, mapping this out needs an inform to support the needs and decisions, then lays the foundation for the sales process. So again, it's like the start of this, we were talking about the outside in view. What's the buyer process? You've just been talking about it. So it's a fantastic viewpoint from Charles there saying, let's start at the exit criteria. What are they trying to achieve and work back? So thank you very much for that, Charles. We've been hinting at some of the barriers, Arup, about, you know, that organizations face executing on their enablement strategy. Could you unpack a few of those a little bit more in your experience?
Completely. So I'd say the barriers to sales are effectively the barriers to enablement, right? Because I mean, it's an state, but my job is to help my salespeople be more productive. So I think the three major barriers to sales, and they're all interrelated, is capacity. So being able to find more time to do all of the key activities that salespeople want to do in advance of meeting customer, and then being able to maximize that amount of time they get with the customer. So capacity is number one. Number two is essentially mindset, and then we have written this down. My brain's gone blank. Number three, of course, is self-development as well. So whenever when I join an organization, then go through that exploratory process in terms of what differentiates the top performers from everybody else, it always comes back to three items. They're creating more capacity themselves, they're utilizing that capacity for self-development, whilst everybody else put some time in Friday afternoon, just get swallowed up, etc. And thirdly, they've got that mindset to push themselves to be able to carve out that capacity, to find smarter ways of working. It's those three items that I think in many respects, as an enablement professional, I'm trying to find ways of being able to do that, right? If you're layering technology, ultimately you're trying to create capacity because you take away some of the run-of-the-mill activity. If you're layering in any kind of education process, then of course you're trying to facilitate self-development and kind of a continual self-development, continual development. And again, when you start to, kind of focus on, as you inevitably do in enablement, where are we going to get the best return, best bang for our buck? Of course, you gravitate towards some of those salespeople that demonstrate the right mindset, because they'll be the early adopters, they'll be the folks that can help champion the types of programs that you're trying to develop in an organization.
That's very true. And if you can explain a little bit more as to how you think that sales enablement and operations can get a more cohesive execution plan, how would they do that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, actually, because I think there's been recently a lot of amalgamation of the sales operations and the sales enablement functions.
Yep.
Actually, I've seen, probably I'd argue, a lot more commonly roles being that are looking towards a revenue operations role, the sort of the seniority of a operations role with a sales enablement department mapping into that. It's been kind of controversial, certainly in the enablement space. It's been very controversial. I've had a number of participated in the debate and had a number of peers sort of arguing that actually enablement isn't the kind of the reporting line into revenue operations or sales operations to suggest that sales enablement is somehow at a lower level of seniority than the operations resources. But actually, the truth is they're both the same. They're the same coin, but two sides of the same coin. I think perhaps why we've gone in that direction, or we see some of that, is because revenue operations does own the systems and does own the data. And so I think there's a sort of a natural skew towards that. But fundamentally, that whole process of bringing the two teams together into one reporting line, I think in many respects is a good thing. So you don't have two teams necessarily operating in separate directions or at risk of having duplication of effort, enabling data and making decisions based on data. Operations has that, oftentimes has a lot of the further and deeper insights based on the data. I think enablement in operations perhaps creates a little bit more independence and autonomy as well, which arguably allows a slightly stronger voice. Again, historically, you maybe heard this expression a few times, Andy. random acts of enablement. And that tends to happen when an enablement team doesn't have quite as much autonomy within an organization, is told to do ABC by the person who's shouting the loudest, and they respond to that. So I think this whole process of bringing operations and enablement together much more cohesively brings a bit of independence, and of course brings that much needed data and insights to be able to shape the right program.
That's brilliant. So, obviously, when we did the brief for this, Rob, the producer, said, "Okay, Andy, you've got to make your points known in terms of this next question." And in the academic sense, we talk about marketing or sales in terms of P's. So there's the 5 P's of marketing, the 6 P's of sales. And I wanted to get your view in a minute. So those P's are product, price, place, promotion, platform, and process. But the other one is people. Now, in the sales context, that talks about people in terms of customers. In my context and my area of research, I think about people as in salespeople. And if you think about an ecosystem of sales, you have that product and price control, you have your place and your promotions, you have your platforms that actually support your processes, but you also have your salespeople. And you know where this question is heading. I believe that enablement kind of focuses on those first 5 things and forgets about the people. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's easier. So in defense of enablement, we can sometimes gravitate towards more of the it's more of the material capability deployment, right? Because it feels it's much easier to show, right? So if you've put in capabilities, if you put in processes, if you put in all of the education that goes around that, it's much easier to show that if you've utilized the data in a different way, it's easier to show that there's a baselining of a position and how you potentially get above that. Now, of course, the magic piece of growth, which is why it's always challenging for enablement to very clearly and distinctly attribute its contribution. The magic element in that is the people element, is the bit that you do. So of course, yes, I think it's a combined. I mean, it's a combined model, right? Focusing on the people and focusing on people in terms of uplifting their skill set. Yes, we can track that back to enablement programs that we've delivered, but equally at the same time, I think getting to the heart of what a person cares about, why they're motivated, and why they want to continue to contribute into a sales function or continue to work within the sales function, I think that's tough. Trying to get to that why is really difficult, and being able to sort of understand why an individual does that, wants to do that. Do they operate in more of an individualistic manner, or do they operate within a team context, within more of a community context? I think trying to get to that why is tough. And we don't get as much of an opportunity to get down to that why in a very obviously Simon Sinek type way. We don't get that opportunity to get down to that why, and so we're never really able to uncover what drives an individual. I think if you've got a smaller organization, perhaps you've got more opportunity to do that. If you've got a very large organization with lots of salespeople, then it's almost impossible.
I think I'd like to ask a kind of connected question to that, which is, are enablement unfairly being asked to fix a problem which is helping people get productive? You mentioned, that's one of the key roles, but having to do that with a massive time pressure because salesperson average tenures now is around the 2-year mark. So does that actually help explain a little bit why we've got to get everybody really, really clear on the things that we do and sell, and therefore, as you say, that getting to the why is not possibly achievable in the time period you've got?
Completely. I think the dynamics of the current, I guess the current macro environment that we're in, it is that there is a lot of mid to short term pressure, and equally, salespeople need to be able to demonstrate their performance in that period of time, and also, I suppose, salespeople are simultaneously testing the company that they've joined. And that in itself, those two drivers, the salesperson testing if they're happy enough in an organization, and the organization, of course, needing the salesperson to be up at productivity much, much, much faster. Those two drivers are kind of collapsing the amount of time that salespeople stay in role. Now, I'm not suggesting that, if a salesperson joins an organization and then moves on 2 to 3 years later, that, that they're not happy. Actually, I think a lot of people do join organizations, develop over that 2 to 3, really, really strong salespeople join organizations, develop over that 2 to 3 year period, and then depart for another opportunity, probably very happily. I guess the challenge then becomes, it's a broader challenge. And I don't think organizations are landing that on enablement's door in isolation. I think enablement are being asked to be able to increase the time to productivity, whatever kind of metric you want to call that, whether it's ramp time, time to first sale, time to second sale, however you want to mention it. Ultimately, measure it. Ultimately, it's about time to productivity, and perhaps enablement are being asked to focus on that and not being given as much opportunity to contribute to the wider conversation, which is, okay, how do we retain this individual? The sort of the attract, kind of develop, retain model seems to be more in the HR world. Can enablement support that? Arguably, yes. Have I given that enough thought? Probably no, but I think it's that retain piece that's really important, and enablement being able to kind of play a more active role in that. And as I sort of think about, more accelerated, fast-growing, perhaps in the sort of the software sales world, etc., there aren't enough enablement. In most organizations, there aren't enough enablement employees to be able to drive all of that kind of attract, develop, retain model in partnership with HR. The handful of employee, sometimes just one enablement professional that's in that organization, is focused a lot of times just on bringing salespeople in and getting them up to productivity as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you mentioned a great point there about sometimes in a team of one. I mean, Georgina Beard, who we both know at Sea, she is the entirety of the resource for sales enablement and does a wonderful job. But she mentioned that last week as well. So we've got 2.5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you, if you can, just to kind of conclude for us, Arup, and go, how do sales leaders stop themselves and avoid falling back into that inside-out view, which is just obviously a habit that's really hard to break?
Yeah, completely. I think it is ultimately mindset. I think it is about being able to, the sales leader ideally needs to be able to sponsor that outside in view, the exit criteria based on buyer behavior, the interactions that buyers have in their organization when the salesperson isn't there. I think when we were prepping for this, we talked about, and we do a little plug now, selling with your buyer as opposed to selling to your buyer, which is kind of all of the thought leadership that comes from Nate Nasrallah. And I think that's exactly the kind of mindset that I would hope that we can all collectively move towards, which is like, how do you understand those exit criteria as you're setting out your sales stages, so that the sales stages start to reflect that buyer journey more concretely? How do you start to understand what interactions are happening outside of your kind of immediate interactions with that buyer, and facilitate that? Because you can still create urgency. You can still showcase to your buyer that there's a cost of inaction if they're not taking a certain set of actions, and that can help move the deal through. So you can still influence the deal. It's not a case of, you're at the behest of just the buyer and the buyer's process. Not at all. I think having a view around that, but then having a very clear view in terms of what interactions are happening and how can you help create the urgency and influence that is important. So maybe moving towards more of that as a genuine vision would be a great outcome to start to see more often.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. So to close out, we have a comment here from Dr. Dale Childs down at Bournemouth University. What he says is there's a large focus on quantity, number of calls, number of meetings, as opposed to quality, which doesn't necessarily help. But then actually Charles Talbot comes back and actually looks at, again, if they're following defined best practices, quality will be there, which I think obviously is a role of enablement to make sure best practice is there. Arup, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your insights, and I look forward to summarising this and actually getting that out to all of our audiences. Thank you very much indeed, and have a wonderful day. Thank you to everybody out there. It's been great. Quality all the way through. As I said, we'll follow up with a summary of all of the action points and thoughts that Arup shared with us. And I look forward again to seeing you tomorrow on the US show and in the coming weeks here at Cranfield Turner Grenville Studios. Thanks to everybody, and Arup, thank you once again.
Thank you.